Welcome to NDTR Spotlight, the corner of the internet where NDTR shine. I'm your host, Marie Lorraine, and today's guest nominated herself. She slid into the NDTR Instagram DMs, and I was so excited when I saw her message to me, and I'm going to read it to you guys. She said, "Hello, my name is Emily, and I'd love a chance to be spotlighted on your page. I've been a DTR since December of 2020. I have a bachelor's in nutrition and dietetics, and knew my senior year of 2019 I wanted to wait to apply to the internship, pass the DTR exam, and gain clinical experience that I knew I was lacking. I believe this credential and pathway in dietetics is not promoted enough, and whether your end goal is to be a diet tech or a dietitian, the DTR is an awesome job and provides so much care and support to healthcare. Let me know if you have any questions." So I could not have written a better way to nominate yourself. That was so clear cut, precise, and simple. And then she was also on top of her LinkedIn page and her Instagram page. So talking about social media branding and branding, Emily is doing it so very well, and I appreciate her taking the time to nominate herself and taking the time to sit with me and share her story for the NDTR audience. So as mentioned in her little bio of herself, she has her bachelor's of science. She's working in a clinical setting in a hospital. And she shared that one of her greatest accomplishments so far in her career as a DTR was creating a safe and effective puree menu from scratch for the entire hospital. So we're going to be asking her about that today in this interview. So let's meet Emily. Emily, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm very excited. I'm very privileged to do this.
Yeah, yes, the honor is I'm very excited to hear more about the clinical setting because we don't have a lot of that on NDTR Spotlight. So, how you said that you knew you were going to do the DTR before you graduated. So, what was your thinking behind that initially?
Initially, I had like great experience. I did so much with dietetics while I was in college. I was also a full-time athlete in cross country and track. But my GPA was lacking. And as we know, when applying to internships, that can be a really huge part of the application. Some internships value that more than others, but it just seemed after talking with my directors and getting some mentor advice that, it probably wasn't the right time for me, and that's okay. I just needed to take a step back and gain some clinical experience because that was the one thing on my application that I was lacking in. And, get that DTR, prove that I'm, smart, I guess, and I can, I'm able to pass tests and eventually the RD. And I'm really glad I took that way because I have been able to learn under a dietitian and also just learn more about this whole career choice and pathway. There's so much I didn't know, even though I chose to go into it.
Yeah, that was a way to, be okay with the change of pace and that conversation of a low GPA that comes up a lot. But I think like having that experience as a college athlete is I don't know. I think that's better than having a 4.0 because you're going to carry that with you. And the DTR path, it seems like it's working out so well for you. So was you listed all of those reasons and you listed them with such confidence, but were you at all disappointed in that switch? How did you handle that mentality change?
Yeah, that's a great question because mentally it can be really tough. I went to a really small college, and what's awesome about the college was that they were very successful. So pretty much every single one of my of the students went on to apply to internships. So I was definitely the odd one out. All my friends were getting their lives together, moving on, and I was really happy for them. But mentally, it took a second to really be firm in my decision. It took a lot of talking, a lot of reaching out to people who, are already dietitians, have, maybe taken pathways that aren't so traditional. I think after that, I was okay. It was just then after graduating, took on a different mentality shift where, you need a lot of self-discipline to then study for this, pass it, apply to jobs that you are going to help you, not waste your time if you're thinking, I want to still apply to internships because you have that like 5 years after graduating to really get that going and make sure everything's completed. So it was definitely hard mentally because I felt more alone. But with support and stuff, like it did help me. And yeah, I couldn't have done it by myself. So
I appreciate that honesty with that because that is, you're really stepping out of the, where everyone else is going for the DTR credential, especially if everyone in your class is going for that RD credential. So, in stepping out on your own, how was that studying for the exam?
ooh, rough. I think I went in a little cocky, I would say. Even though like I didn't have a great GPA and stuff, I do enjoy learning. I love studying and stuff. I felt like I didn't study well. I actually did not pass the DTR the first time around. And that was definitely a huge blow to what I thought I knew. But really, it's not what you know, it's just how to take a test. I learned so much with my bachelor's degree and my background, but it was really how do you take like such a large standardized test? And I felt like the first time going into it, I just did not prepare well in that area.
Yeah, the way the questions are worded and how
Mhm.
it just stops on you, it's very, very particular. So, what was the shift in your studying the second time around?
Definitely gaining more people in on my studying. I still had friends that were still at Ashland University where I went to college. So talking with them, studying with them, just studying like what they were studying, or just having them there to study with, not doing it by myself. If people like weren't in dietetics, like getting family members to quiz me. I'm definitely like a talker, and that's how I learn better, especially in like practical experiences, not just on paper. So, really recognizing that, recognizing like what ways help you learn better, and then just running with that, which I didn't do the first time around.
It's okay, you learn and you change, which is that's a part of like life, I guess. You just learn how to, when you fail, you learn, you get back up.
Yes.
So that's an interesting way of studying that you brought up. You went to your peers in undergrad. Were they studying for the DTR exam, or you were just studying what they were studying? I mean, you said that, but I'm just asking for further clarity.
Yeah, a little bit of both. I actually did have one friend who was a senior at the time, who was planning on going on to do her DTR. She has not actually passed that, but at the time she was planning on it, and a lot of it kind of overlapped. Like I would study what they would be doing, like in food service, a lot of the stuff that is easy to forget. um, and before I had practical experience with it in the hospital, that was extremely helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. The practical experience makes it stick in, but when you just read it in a textbook, it's like, why is this even relevant?
Right, exactly.
So were you an encouragement to your classmate who was going to go the DTR route, or have you found that you going this route has been able to encourage students that are underneath you in that program?
Um, I hope I'm an encouragement. I This is a side note, but I do plan on speaking again at my college to the seniors for the next school year, just to talk about it a little bit more. We have great directors there, but I still don't think it's talked about as much, or it's not like you need to either go on to internships or do nothing with nutrition. There's so many routes that you can take, even with grad school and stuff. That wasn't my choice, but I think it's worth talking about, and that's something that I would love to go and do.
Yes, I hope that you do get to do that because I had a similar experience where I went back to my school and I talked about the DTR credential, and kids were like, "Oh, like I've heard of it, but like I don't really know." So
Yeah.
this is how you get that credential out, and they'll see you being successful and like making good leaps and bounds in the career. So I'm excited for you to do that. You're definitely gonna change some stuff up in your university.
Yeah, my directors have already invited me back. It's just waiting until the school year starts. So yeah, I'm excited for that.
That's exciting. So you passed the DTR exam, or you were so. Did you wait to pass the exam before you started your job search?
Oh, yeah, great question. So I really wanted that experience right away, whether I was, had the credential or not. I had heard that you can get hired without it, but I thought my chances were really slim because it was the middle of COVID and like hardly anyone was hiring. I think people were just starting to hire. And then I was applying for healthcare, so it was just like even crazier. Um, but I actually got hired on before my credential, so that was really awesome, actually.
Okay, so you have to let us know, how did that happen? What was the interview process like? How did you find the job? Give us the details.
So lots of LinkedIn for sure. Um, oh my gosh, I use so many like search engines and stuff. I was applying to like nursing homes. I was applying for like not really even DTRs, applying for like diet aid, diet clerk. Not jobs that I really wanted, but at least I thought like this is something like, and I could always find something else at the hospital if something opens up. Um, but yeah, the one diet tech one in Northwest Ohio, which I'm in Ohio right now, very small hospital. I reached out, I think it was like March, and hadn't heard for a couple months. And then I heard back in the beginning of July. So quite a few months later, I got a random call, and I was like, oh yeah, definitely I'll come in for an interview. Like I thought you guys forgot about me and I wasn't gonna hear anything. I think at the time when I reached out to them after submitting my application, they just weren't hiring at that time. So
Got you. And so the job, when you're looking for your searches, what job words did you use? What keywords did you use in your search?
oh, I guess like dietary, nutrition, diet tech. I really wanted the diet tech one, so diet tech, DTR, um, all of those kind of similar words. But when I quickly found out it was kind of like slim pickings, then you trying to incorporate nutrition or nutritional services, diet aid, sort of in that realm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's keep the story going. You got the call for the interview. You're going in. It's been months. So talk about perseverance and just putting yourself out there and waiting. What was the interview like?
I was kind of shocked. I tried to go in pretty confident, even though I had no clinical experience and they knew that from my resume. Um, I think I just really lucked out. I thought the interview went well and I thought I connected well. I interviewed with a nutrition manager, dietitian, and the speech pathologist who was director of our department. Um, and obviously super nervous. I interview well, but I just get super nervous, obviously. Um, and I would say it was relatively short, which leaving you always think, oh, well, maybe that wasn't so good. But they had just hired a dietitian after the last one had retired, and their DTR had quit with the retired dietitian pretty abruptly. So they really needed someone to come in, especially as COVID was sort of lessening, but they just needed a lot more help. And I was pretty much like, I don't have clinical experience, but that could be viewed as a good thing because I'm very teachable and I will, I'm an open book and I can adapt to anything that you guys have to offer. So I tried to spin it as like a positive thing.
Yeah, turn your weakness into a strength. It's all perspective. That
Yeah.
was well done there. So do you remember any specific questions they asked you during the interview?
Um, Gosh, this was a while ago. So I was really nervous that they would ask me nutrition related questions for some reason. I knew the dietitian was going to be there. and I just thought maybe she'd throw something out there. I don't know. So I did actually brush up on some things, some maybe obvious clinical things, but they didn't ask me any of that. I don't know why I thought they would. You know, they're not there to quiz you, they're just there to get to know you and see if you'll be a good fit. They did ask me some basic like personality questions, like how would you handle this, or um, maybe like what was your biggest like hurdle to jump over, giving it lots of examples, just lifestyle examples and everything. So I pulled from past job but also from school since I was newly graduated.
Yeah. So it sounds like just your normal interview questions.
Yeah. I didn't know what to expect going into it, and I will say it's not what I expected, but I'm just really glad. I think I connected well with the people, and they obviously liked me and they hired me. So
Yeah, yeah, for 100%. Yeah, and having it was good that you still went in prepared for that, the clinical stuff, because nutrition, there's so many different categories. So
yeah.
that was wise of you. They probably knew like she has her stuff together. You could just tell by a person. So DTRs typically have very different jobs in clinical settings. They could do food service or see patients. So what's your job description there? What do you do as a DTR in the hospital you work at?
Yeah, so I would say a large part is food service, like the menu planning from what you said in the beginning. I've done a lot of work there because they definitely needed a lot of work. But the since the dietitian I have such a close relationship, she's entrusted me with a lot of outpatient, but then also inpatient education and sometimes screening, things like that. So I do get to chart, and then it's all under her supervision.
Wow, that is excellent experience. That's basically an internship, but you're getting paid for it. That is
Yeah.
wonderful. So good. So when you're doing your outpatient, where is the scope for you that was set up there? What can you do? What can you not do?
Well, typically it's just kind of general education. We don't have a very diverse group of people, I would say, as far as like diagnoses and everything. I do like diabetic education, cardiac, and then gestational diabetes. Those three are the most popular, I would say. And we go off of the nutrition care manual as far as education goes, and um, I don't write. I will say I don't write PES statements or like tube feeding recommendations and stuff as far as scope of practice, but and we can get into that because I think the scope of practice is really murky and kind of a gray area, which I think should be a little bit more black and white. But basically, as long as the dietitian like kind of trusts you, it also says that it is under their license, so they are responsible for you. So I don't do anything crazy, or it is all under what I've been educated on. But I really enjoy the outpatient, I will say, more than the inpatient. It's very rewarding.
Yeah, because you can build relationships a little bit more. That's good
Yeah.
that you're figuring it out. And yeah, the scope of practice. Oh, I'm trying to do the mini series on it, and it's weeding through all those documents. There's so much gray, which is frustrating,
Hmm.
but I feel like it could be beneficial because you can work with gray. Black and white sometimes can be tricky, but yeah,
Yeah.
no. I definitely hear the frustration there because you're like, I could do anything a dietitian can do, but I have to be under a dietitian. But then what? It's just confusing.
Yes, yes. And I think at least for diet techs, it's a little bit more clear in a clinical setting. But if you're like off on your own, especially like maybe at a nursing home and you'll have the dietitian like on staff, I feel like I don't know what I would do in that position, but at least like I have the dietitian on staff and we're working together, we're figuring it out.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think in nursing homes like that, they have to have a consulting dietitian,
Right.
but
Okay.
they
Yeah.
just come in once a week for like 8 hours and just do the high risk patients. So it's very much like you're working essentially like a dietitian. You just have to have
Yeah.
that other person with the credential. So it's great experience for a
Mhm.
DTR. And DTRs can do. A lot. So you mentioned the diets, the Puree diet in the beginning when you were just talking. So how did that project come about?
So we are a very small hospital, about 50 beds. So at first they were doing the pre-made like puree products, and not unfortunately, but they just weren't getting a lot of patients that required a puree diet, which can be good. But so those products were expiring and it was just getting too expensive. So at the very beginning, they actually didn't really have any plan in place. They just knew that they couldn't keep purchasing that and they needed something ASAP. So that's how it came about. So I knew that in the interview. And so then I knew that on day one. And so that's what I started on day one. So.
Wow, that even though it's a small hospital, that project sounds daunting. So how did you approach that?
Oh gosh. At first, it was a little bit of reaching out to my dietitian friends that were at small hospitals. I have one really close friend that is, and uh, wow, now I can't even remember what she said that she does. They might be big enough to get their own pre-made products, but a lot of it was just working with the IDDSI guidelines, um, kind of thinking outside of the box, especially when it comes to it tasting good, because that was also a really big goal of mine. You know, I tried every single recipe that I made, lots of trial and error, but overall, after I made each recipe, I had to agree like, okay, I would also eat this. So
It must be a good menu then if you were able to so that's a lot of eating puree foods is not a fun activity.
no.
No. So you mentioned guidelines. You mentioned the IDDS. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, the IDDSI. Don't ask me what that stands for actually, because I don't think I could remember off the top of my head. But it's pretty much just the kind of like puree guidelines, and then it also has like mechanical soft. Like there's different levels, um, and so they have different like testing techniques. Mostly like spooning techniques, checking for clumps and stuff, making sure that no patients aspirate, which is always the number one priority. Um, so yeah, that's just through, you can find that through like the Eat Right website and stuff. So
Yeah, it's so cool when you can start using those resources and produce something that's valuable and really going to help people's lives.
yeah.
So, out of curiosity, what was your favorite pureed dish that you added to that menu?
Ooh, that's a good question. At first I thought eggs, but it wasn't. I think, oh, it was a protein one. I think it was either like sausage or I think we did get meatloaf to work as well. It had to be one of those where it kind of already has like a strong flavor and like you already kind of like the food. The texture didn't matter as much. Um, I think that one's probably my favorite. Yeah. Or something that like you didn't have to do much to, like mashed potatoes. Then
Oh
it
yeah.
still like tastes like mashed potatoes and it still feels the same.
Yeah, that's probably the best one on the menu because
Yeah.
it's like it's already mashed. So in working with that and the consistency, did you have to work out all with the speech therapist?
I did a little bit, yeah. We definitely had to kind of get like approval through some things, and she was helpful in knowing a little bit deeper into the guidelines that I didn't have as much experience with. But overall, just kind of worked within our kitchen, and I would also have the dietitian and nutrition manager taste test because you gotta force them to be in your misery a little bit.
All in this together.
Yep, we're all in this together, so you got to try it too. But yeah, so
That's funny. So I kind of want to go back to more of the charting part that you mentioned that you do some charting. And so when you were learning the charting process, since it's still kind of you started in July. You started July of
Yeah.
last year.
Mhm.
Yeah. So it's still like not that new, but when you were learning charting, how did you find a strategy? Were there any hindrances, or how was the process of learning charting is my question.
Well, thankfully, I did a good amount of that in school. You can learn a lot about charting, but until you go to where you're going to be working, everyone has a different program. Ours is pretty old. The dietitian is actually working on changing that right now, um, just to better suit like how we chart patients and everything. So I pretty much learned from her as far as how she uses each program. Um, but yeah, it did take a little bit of time, but I've definitely gotten a lot better, a lot faster. The first one took quite a while, and then you read through and make sure you didn't make any mistakes. But now it's much quicker, and it's definitely not as big a deal. I'd say charting was definitely the most intimidating part as far as seeing patients, because that you can look back on notes, people can read your notes, and what if you document wrong? So that I felt like that was a big deal to me.
Yeah, the charting can be definitely intimidating, especially in internships, and then also when you just start a DTR job and you have to chart. So well said. You get faster at it. So if you're listening to
Yeah.
this or watching this, you get faster at charting as you do more of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
So um going now, let's shift to the other aspect of your job where you're talking and educating patients. And so what were the learning curves in that aspect, doing it for real in a clinical setting?
I'd say the biggest learning curve, which isn't nutrition related at all, but dealing with sick people, dealing with inpatients, sick people who are just woke up, lying down on their bed, not really caring what you're saying. You know going into it, because hopefully someone's told you that not everyone cares about nutrition and not everyone is going to care about what you have to say, but dealing with it firsthand, like right in front of you, I will say is quite shocking. I like to think that I get along with a lot of people. I love, having that conversation with people, but your passion can't be forced onto someone. So I'd say that was the biggest hurdle. And I will often get very nervous walking into a room because you just don't know what you're walking into. All of our rooms in the hospital, except for a couple in the ICU, are private rooms, which is really nice. You're not having a conversation with another patient like on the other side of a bed or something like that. So you are very private, but even then, sometimes they're super blunt and they just may say something rude, and then you just don't know how to respond, and you're like, okay, well, I hope you have a nice day.
Yeah, that's one of the hard things with clinical. I 100% agree, and I think you nailed it right on how you explain that. You can't force it, and just smile and be polite. So I want to ask you, as a DTR working in the hospital and seeing patients, do you do any aspects of the physical exam, nutritional physical exam with your clients, or is that something that just the dietitian does?
Great question. This actually came up recently because for a long time I was under the impression that DTRs can't do that. Um, because of COVID, I will say it never really came up for a really long time because at least I'm not touching patients. I can see a lot of the time, some of their body. So I can see like legs for edema or something like that. So I can at least put my eyes to it, or maybe malnutrition with their like clavicle and stuff. Um, there's things that kind of give them away and you get a good idea of what you're looking at. But I would say that is mostly, or if not all, on the dietitian. But if she doesn't, catch something, or I may mention it to her if I've seen a patient and she hasn't, that way she knows and is aware of it and then can chart on it and address it.
Okay, thank you. I was super curious about that. So you're saying if you do see someone with like some muscle wasting, just visually, are you able to put that in the chart, or do you just relay that to the dietitian?
I will put that in a chart. I just don't specify, like, I can think of edema for some reason. Like, I won't specify like +1, +2 because I didn't actually test for that. But then I will, there's a part in the chart that I can consult dietitian if they haven't already been consulted. But again, it's such a small hospital, like I can talk to the dietitian and just tell her, and it's all good.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. So you really are like you're fully fun. That's refreshing to hear that a DTR can even know to look for that and can put it in their chart and like reach out to the dietitian because you're doing it's just makes you so valuable,
Yeah,
working in that
yeah.
field. So being a DTR for a little over a year now, have you found anything that's been frustrating or annoying or challenging about the credential holding it?
This may sound minor, but explaining to people, maybe family or friends, other coworkers what you do, because I don't think anyone knows what you do. You say like, oh, I'm not a dietitian. I'm like one below a dietitian. I would say that for a while. And I'm like, why am I saying that? That sounds really demeaning. And there's just so much more value to it. So it's just really hard explaining to like friends and family, which in the beginning I cared a lot about because I felt like maybe I had to prove something more because I wasn't going on to internships, but it was for a good reason. And it's hard to explain this process to people who are not in dietetics. So I've been really happy with my job, and I don't really think I've had any complaints about it or anything. I do like what the diet tech has to offer, but I will say, like, I'm very excited to move on and become an RD because I have goals in private practice in sports. And so I have no regrets with the DTR. I will just say, like, trying to explain it was really tough mentally in the beginning, for sure.
Yeah. And I've been guilty of explaining it the way that you said you're explaining it in the beginning. So, how have you changed the way you explain it now?
I like to say that, I help support the dietitian. I definitely deal with more of like the background or behind the scenes, um, doing things that maybe they don't have time for, or doing things, or just sharing the load, doing almost exactly what they're doing. But, we have a lot of patients today, and maybe she has an appointment somewhere, that is sharing the load, and that is supporting each other, looking at each other as equals, which I do feel like I have that relationship with her. So, that is really amazing. But, mostly just supporting the dietitian, dealing with like meal planning. I would rather say specifics of what I do rather than just generalizing it more and more and saying, well, I'm just one below the dietitian. Like, no, I deal with maybe some food service. I do deal with patients. I like putting that out there and giving more weight to it. So
Yeah, that's a good way of explaining it. And I like that you mentioned supporting that you guys work together and support each other because um it's a team atmosphere. And then as you move on to a dietitian, you'll still have that idea and understand what a DTR is and be able to treat them the way that, they deserve and not less than because it's so easy to get caught up in that I'm just below and I'm less than. And so building up that confidence,
yeah.
super well said. So you are thinking about you want to move on to the dietitian role. So what does that process look like for you? How are you planning to achieve that goal?
Well, I applied to internships back in February, actually, and I found out I got matched to an internship the beginning of April. And my rotations start September 20th. So I'd say getting matched was like a huge hurdle in moving on in that direction.
That's like the main thing you have to
Yeah.
do. So with the application process, sometimes it's scared to apply when you're removed from the school and you don't have those resources anymore. So how is that process doing diecast without your school right there?
Whew, it was stressful. I knew I was going to apply. I kind of was just like, just like bite the bullet and just do it, you know? But I still procrastinated for, you know, probably like a month or two. And I was like, it was probably 6 months, 6 to 7 months out from the application due date that I was like, all right, like, let's get started. I actually knew going into it that I wanted to do the distance route. So I was like, I need to find preceptors. So that was a big deal for me. It took up a lot of time, especially working full time, and then a lot of, again, self-discipline because I wasn't in college anymore, and most of my friends actually were dietitians by the time I started applying, and even throughout that process. So
Yeah. Yeah. I know what that's like, having your friends be dietitians and you're still a DTR and you're like, but hey, DTRs are still super, super pivotal. And so you mentioned uh you're doing the distance track.
yeah.
So how did you land those preceptors?
Well, as far as clinical is concerned, it's all about who you know. Um, Connections are key. And I think I heard that about 100 times before it actually clicked. But you know, you really gotta keep telling people that until they get it, because clinical will be the hardest one to find. At least that's what I have heard. It was my first call, and that's all I had to do. But I didn't actually reach out to clinical dietitians on like the Eat Right preceptor list. I immediately reached out to a family friend who worked in a healthcare system. Actually, she was kind of up there, but yeah, it is all about who you know as far as clinical is concerned. And then I'm also doing my food service at the same site as my clinical, so it's more of like a two-in-one, if you choose to do that. But the rest of them, I would say, you know, just reaching out to dietitians, using as many resources as you can. Most of every single one of those are, I would say, like, you know, strangers, like random people that I reached out to. So
Yeah, that's it's key. Networking, networking, networking. I
yeah.
hear it almost from everyone that I talk to, and it's it makes a huge difference. So, was there not an opportunity to do clinical at the place you're working?
So I will say yes, there was. I think we could have made something work, but since I was already working there as a DTR and it's not a very big hospital, I would know, you know, what I was getting myself into, and I really wanted to see what it's like at a larger hospital. I am having a couple rotations at a couple different hospitals that are, you know, bigger than the one I'm at, but not that much bigger. And then I will be ending on one that is quite large. I actually don't know their bed count, but it's several hundred. If yeah, it's a lot. So
Wow. Props to you to like pushing yourself out of your comfort zone. And like I would have
yeah.
been like, I'm just gonna stay here, but you're gonna that's awesome. You are someone to follow in the nutrition field because you are really doing some great things.
Oh, thanks.
So you mentioned, well, yeah, of course, you mentioned looking at resources and whatnot. Are there any resources that really stick out to you during your time getting the DTR or applying to diecast?
Yeah, so definitely the Eat Right. I did mention that. As far as preceptors go, gosh, I'm trying to think. Oh my gosh, and a very underrated one is Instagram. I almost forgot about that. I'm really glad I remembered, because just searching Instagram for dietitians, huge gateway. I mean, you're gonna reach people and find people that Google does not do justice for it. So many dietitians are getting on Instagram and promoting themselves, and it's awesome because it's very easy to find them then, and you can almost, I'm not gonna almost get like picky with it, I would say. It's very easy to find like what it says in their bio. They're most likely very clear and cut that they, you know, work in the community or they do work as in clinical. So Instagram, very underrated, but very helpful.
That's a good one. That's something I would not have thought of at all. But that's, yeah, because they're right there and it's about community and engaging and that social interaction. How did you go about reaching out to people on Instagram though without being tacky?
Yes, that is always. hard because depending on how many, followers they have or how, big they are, you don't want to waste someone's time. You don't want to, be annoying because you don't know how many DMs they get or DMs they get about wanting to intern. Um, so I did try to sound, professional, but to the point. Saying like one or two lines about you because you also only have so many characters and you don't want to be sending, a couple messages. So keeping it to one message, being clear cut and dry, but also showing that you are passionate and, you could be a benefit to them, is really important.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, that, as you were speaking too, I realized that you slid into the NDTR DMs, and that was a
Yeah.
perfect example of how eloquent and like well spoken you sounded, and probably how you reached out to the dietitian. So yeah, you've mastered the social media connection, and that's impressive. So guys, listen back to how she messaged me on NDTR Spotlight as a guideline if you want to reach out to dietitians or reach out to NDTR Spotlight, because prime example.
Yeah,
So,
and what's so great about our field is that, 9 times out of 10 that dietitian is very caring and loves the field of nutrition and just wants to help and give back. So, I thought it was really intimidating at first, but even if people said no, they were extremely nice about it. And at least some of them would actually give me resources or tell them, said like, oh, well, hey, reach out to this person, even though I'm not able to precept. So, just don't be afraid to reach out.
yes, I'm glad you said that. That is such a unique thing about this field. Just we're all just wanting to help, but just help other people, because it's hard being a
Yeah, it
DTR or
is.
being a dietitian. Just getting there is hard, and then there's so much information, and there's so much misinformation, and reading through all of that. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Is there anything else, Emily, you would like to share with the NDTR audience?
Um, I would say, if you're struggling like with your career and whether or not to stay in like the DTR field or go through the RD process, mentoring is something that I didn't really catch on to a whole lot until I've heard it, several times. I'm much more introverted, and so I don't love to ask for help or talk about my feelings. But, that's something that we all need to be doing more. You don't need a professional career advice person, but at least like finding someone that knows you and that, you can be vulnerable with, talk about, the real pros and cons of moving on or staying where you are and being, having the lifestyle that you want. And as long as it's a fulfilling career, that's the right decision for you. But, reaching out and talking with someone about that, I think is really important.
Well, guys, you heard it from Emily. Pros and cons list. Think
Yeah.
about your decision. Don't just dive into the RD. You might have to say DTR. Really good, and talk to someone who knows you. Well said. Emily, thank you so much for your time. A wealth of knowledge, really great insight onto what a clinical DTR can do. So many awesome things, and be a very helpful, supportive teammate in the nutrition department at a hospital. Make sure you give this video a like, and you can follow Emily. Emily, where can people find you?
At Nutrition Game Strong on Instagram.
Yes, and she's super friendly and has really cool posts. Not that many yet, but follow her. I'm sure she'll post a lot more. And we'll see you in our next interview. Thank you so much for tuning in.